Hi everyone, welcome to today's Lunch and Learn webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we will be covering one of our add-on features for the asset management module. So we're going to be taking a look at some of the key features and capabilities of this module in the system, including some of the things that you can use it for, as well as how you can apply it to your forms and processes within Formatize. So let's get started. Great, so coming into your Formatize dashboard, once you have the asset management module activated in your account, you'll be able to access this by going into the assets dropdown. So here you will see a couple of different features and options available to you, but the one that we're going to focus on first is our asset register. In your asset register, this is where you'll be able to see a full list of all of the different assets that you have set up within your asset management module. For your assets, you do have the option to set up different asset types, which can act as categories for the different types of assets or items that you may be managing in your account. These asset types are split by the unique or specific information that you're wanting to capture for each item, and that is all set out in the tabs themselves. So we can see here, going into one of our examples for the fire extinguishers, there's a few different fields of information that we can capture and see within this asset register page. So there's a few fields of standard information that we can capture for our assets, and this includes the register ID, which is a unique identifier that's assigned to any asset within your asset register. And we also have an asset ID that can be the same as the register ID by default. But if you do have your own number sequencing that you want to use or continue using, you can add this to this field to be managed within the asset register information. The asset name is a free text field that you can populate details into. And then each of your assets will be linked to a specific client location and zone. So what this relates to is your CRM contact information, where you can set up a billing name or client name. And then within that client, you can set up different locations. So these are the physical address for that property that an asset might be located at, for example. And then within that address, you do have the ability to filter the areas of that address further using the zone function. So this is quite useful when you do have quite a large property or a large business that you may be servicing that has a few different assets located at the one address. So you may need to be able to split them out into different zones like we have done here for this example. Now, following the standard information that you can capture, you can also set up custom fields of information that is unique to that asset type. So here for our fire extinguisher example, we have the make model, the size, the rating, the type, when the last pressure test was completed, and what the inspection result was from the last inspection. Within the asset, you can see that you can add another type filter. So here's where we can specify if it's a what type of fire extinguisher it is. So keeping all of those different types of assets within that one umbrella for the category. Once you've set up all of the custom fields, you do have the option here to add new assets from this page. So you can add a single asset for that particular asset type that you are viewing. And you can also set up asset types themselves, but I will cover that off shortly in a bit more detail for you. If you're getting started with the asset register and you do have an existing register that you're using that you're wanting to add to the system, you are also able to import that information into the asset register, just speeding up that process when you're getting started. Going into one of the assets that we have here, we can look at the asset card details. So here is where you can capture specific information about the item or equipment that we're tracking in our asset register. And there's also a few other options with automated information that's tracked and captured for the specific asset. So looking at the asset details themselves, here we can see the asset register ID, which is again that unique identifier that we have assigned to the specific item. And then here we have the asset number field, which you can see is editable, where we can change that number to our own sequencing. The asset category is identified as well as the asset type. And then here we can select the client and location and zone. So as mentioned, these are linked to your CRM list of contacts. So you can select the client from the drop-down field, and then that will give you their options in terms of the locations or addresses that you can assign to this asset. The zone can be created within the asset itself. So when you're setting up the assets, you can add a new zone and assign it to that specific asset. But the zone is optional, so you don't have to use a zone for all of your different assets within the module. The name and description fields are just free text fields that you can add information to. And then below this, we have our custom fields of detail that are specific to this asset type. So you will find a mix of fields that you can use within your asset type. Here we have a few free text fields, but we also have a multiple choice field where we can select the type, as well as a calendar option for the last pressure test date. The GPS coordinates will automatically update once the asset has been processed through a form for the first time, so that can give you an exact location at that customer's address. You can add a photo for your asset, and it also automatically generates a QR code for each individual asset within your register. So this QR code can be used to apply to that asset, and then it can be scanned by your users on site to bring up that asset card information, and it can also interact with the forms that you're completing, which are linked to the specific asset type. Going into the other options we have here, we can see the change logs. So this will give you a log of any time that any of the fields of information are updated within this asset. So it will give a date and timestamp to show when that change was made. And you can see here that it's highlighting the change of information in red, make it really easy to identify what was modified and when this was completed. Right at the end of this table of information here, we can also see the change source, which will show us whether or not it was a manual change, which is when someone has accessed the asset information through the register and manually updated the details in this tab here. Otherwise, asset information can also be updated through a submitted form. So this is really useful if it has been updated as part of a service and you want to go into that specific submitted form to review the information and further. You can capture notes and photos for your assets, and we can also see a full history of all of the different types of forms that have been completed, which are linked to this asset in particular. So this is any form template that has the asset table set up within it. So it can cover a range of different options, like what we have here in this example for a maintenance report that was completed. We can also see a similar history of the jobs that have been completed for that asset. And then we can also upload and manage resources that relate to that particular item in the system as well. Just like any documentation that you're adding to your resources in the resource module within Formatize, you can also add a version as well as an expiry date to the documentation, which can automatically notify you when that date is coming up so that you can review the file and update it or follow on with any actions as required. So now we've taken a look at the asset register and the information that you can capture and manage within the asset card. We can see this information in action as part of a form. So as mentioned, you can link the assets to any form template within your account. And in this example, we're going to take a look at a job report that is using the extinguisher asset information to populate in the form and allow the user to update the details as required. So just jumping into our forms, I'm going to start a new form template here so we can see the information. Now, in the form, we do need to have the CRM client location and zone to be able to populate the asset information and link it back to that asset register. Now, if this form was being completed as part of a job, these fields would be pre-populated based on the job details that are entered for that client information already. But as it's a standalone form, I do need to complete this information and just select that client detail from those drop-down fields. Just to show you here, in the equipment details is where we have an asset table placed. So this is taking the asset information from our fire extinguisher asset. And so those are the different fields of detail that we're wanting to show for the different assets that relate to the client. Now it's currently blank because I do need to select the client. So I'm just going to select a client from the list. And then now, as we scroll down, we can see that this has populated the table with all of the assets that are linked to that specific client and location in the system. Now, in this scenario, if I was completing this job report for only one of the assets and I wanted to narrow this list down further, as these assets have been set up with a zone, we can then select the relevant zone that we want to include for this report from the drop-down field. So I'm going to select the warehouse zone, and we will have this message pop up, which is asking if you want to keep all of the existing information in that table where we have the 2 rows of asset information, or if you want to remove any of the irrelevant data just based on the selection that we have made here. Now, because we want to filter it just to the assets that are located within that warehouse zone, I'm going to select remove, and it will update that table to only show us the one asset. With this asset information that we see here, it is also interactive. So what that means is that we can update any of these details as required. And this may be relevant for this asset in particular for the last pressure test. So if in this scenario, I'm the user on site and I have completed a pressure test and I need to update this date to show that that is no longer from August in 2019, but it is from today's date. So I can go into the calendar option that we have available, find today's date and select that. And once I submit the form, it will automatically update the asset register to show the latest date and to keep that information up to date for other users to refer to. So it's really useful to make sure that you always have the most up-to-date information for your assets and equipment. Great. So now that we've seen how the asset register works and how it interacts with a live form, we can then go through the steps of setting up our own asset type and then linking this asset to an existing form template in the system. So the steps to set this up is to go into our assets and we can select the add asset type option here. So for your asset types, we'll just jump back into our full list. We do have 2 different categories that I did mention as part of the asset details. So we have the option of setting up either a location asset or a mobile asset. So a location asset relates to an item that is linked to a client and location. So as we saw with our fire extinguisher, that was located at a specific customer's property. So we've set that fire extinguisher asset type up as location assets. You can also use that location type category to manage items such as tasks that are relevant to a client's property. So for example, for a landscaping or a cleaning client, you may have a list of specific tasks, such as for landscaping, mowing and hedge trimming, that needs to be completed at that client's property. So what the assets can do for you is when you select that client and location, it can populate those relevant tasks into the form and show the user what they need to complete on site. This is really useful for future-proofing your processes and make it nice and easy to onboard new staff so that you don't need to specifically have visited that site before and just know what you need to do. It's all there in front of you in the form and ready to go. The other option that we have here is our mobile assets. So these are used for internal equipment that the business uses or manages. So for example, you could set up vehicles or tools and equipment as a mobile asset, and you can also assign these to jobs. So it's really useful in terms of showing where your different vehicles, for example, are assigned to within your job scheduler, or if you have specific equipment that you want to see when it is available or when it's not available, you're able to view that information in the scheduler when it is set up as a mobile asset. For the example that we'll work with today, we'll look at setting up a mobile asset to manage our company's vehicles. So to do this from our asset type screen, we can go into the new asset type option here. The first field to complete is your asset type name, and this is what will appear in the tab when you're looking at your asset register. You also need to select the asset category just based on what type of asset you will be setting up. So in this case, I will be adding a mobile asset. And you can also change the asset manager to a specific user in the system. Now, once we've added that information, there are some default fields that will always need to be included for any of your assets. But at this stage, we can add in any of our own custom fields that we want to capture information for. So when you are adding fields into your asset type, you have a couple of different options to set the field type as. So here we can add it as a text field, or you do have the barcode option. We can set up a drop-down field with multiple choice selection. There is a number field that will limit it to numerical values. There's a decimal field, a date or a time field. So for my vehicle asset, I'm going to add in the option to identify the make, and I'm going to keep this as a text field. And with the different field types, you will see various options that will appear here. Now, required, if that is selected, will mean that anytime you're adding a new asset for this asset type, you will have to input information into this field. The multi-line option for your text fields just means that you can input more information if it's a longer description field, for example. Next, I'm going to include the model, and I'm still going to keep this as a free text field. Then we want to include the registration number or the reg. And again, I'm going to leave that as a text field. Then I want to see what the current odometer reading is for the vehicle. And I'm going to change this to a number field just to limit the input from the user. Then I want to see when the next service is due based on the kilometers, so I can keep track of that information. This one here, I'm going to make a number as well, just to ensure that the details are the same type that are entered into each of these fields. Lastly, I want to add in the purchase price. I can keep track of that information. So you can add as many fields of detail that you need to capture for your assets. And once you have included these fields, you can also reorder them. So if once saving this information, I need to come back at a future date and add in more fields of detail, I can do that and then reorder the information to make sure that it slots in the correct order that I want to display this in. Once you're happy with the information that is shown here, you can then select the group permissions. So if you have multiple different groups of users in your account, you can select some of them to be limited by what they can change or create in the asset register. So if for some users, you only want them to be able to update the asset information or only view the asset information, you can limit that specific group. Once you've got all of those details, save your changes, and then that will set up the asset type for you. So now when I go into my asset register, I will be able to see a tab for my vehicles, and I can start creating assets with that specific asset type. Next, I want to link this particular asset type for my vehicles to an existing form template. So to do this, I'm going to go into my forms and then select View Form Templates. And here I have a pre-built pre-start checklist that I want to use for my assets. So with this form template, I want to be able to populate the vehicle's information without having to type that detail in every time that I'm creating a pre-start, and to show that up-to-date detail from our asset register. Going into the form builder is where we can view and edit this detail. In your form builder, under the CRM option is where you will find the different asset options here. So we have the first option for an asset list, which will add a table to your form, which will then populate with all of the different assets that relate to a particular client and location. So if that location has 5 different assets set up, the table would then populate with all 5 assets. For the asset item field, this is used to allow the user to select or scan one asset in the form. So it's really useful if you're using that QR barcoding and you have that attached to the vehicle, for example, in this scenario. So the user with this asset item field can walk up to that QR code, scan it from the form, and then it will populate the asset information, and it will also back populate the client location and zone into the form. In this example, I'm going to set up the asset list just so that we can see that structure and how it interacts with the client and location and zone information in our form. Now, the key thing to remember is anytime you are using assets in your form template, you do need to have the client and location fields in the same form. So this is your CRM client and your CRM location field. The zone, the CRM zone field is optional. Again, if some of your assets are using the zone, it's helpful to include this. Otherwise, if you aren't using the zone with any of your assets, you don't need to include this particular field. Once we've added in the asset field, in this case, it's the asset list, selecting that field will bring up the field settings. So it is useful to update the question to show what asset type you're going to be populating into that table. In this example here, I'm going to populate the vehicle information. And we can also update the object name to show that this asset table relates to the vehicle asset. It can just help you with setting up any actions or events against this field, easily identify what it is within the form builder. Once we've added in the question, we can then link the particular asset type to it. So the client, location, and zone fields that we already have added in this form template will automatically link to this table, and you don't need to change that information within the field settings. The drop-down that we do need to change is the asset type, as this is currently not selected, and we want to select the relevant asset details that we're going to populate into this table. So I'll select my vehicles asset type, and you can see that it's updated this table to now show all of those different fields that we've set up as part of the asset type details. With the asset table, you can change the view of how you're editing and working with the information. So this can come down to your personal preference. By default, it will show in a list view, but you can show it in a table view, which will give it a bit more of a easier view, seeing all of those different fields within that table format. By default, within the form and the PDF report, your asset table information will always show in the table format, no matter what you have selected here. Again, this is just personal preference when you're working in the form builder. Now, in the properties for this table, I've still got the vehicle asset table selected. We can see a list with all of the different asset information. So on the left-hand side, this is a list of the asset fields that are available for this asset type. And on the right-hand side is the object name and field name of the actual field within our form builder that is linked to this asset field. With this information, if there are specific fields from your asset that you don't want displayed in the form itself, so sometimes in our asset register, we might have specific information such as the purchase price that we want to capture and manage for our assets, but we may not necessarily need to use this as part of any of our form templates. So with the asset fields that are added here, they do still work just like any field does within the form builder, meaning that we can right-click and delete to remove this field from the asset table, just so that's not included for our users as part of this form. So saving that change will then update the table to remove that information and only show the fields that we want the user to see as part of that form. Along these lines here as well, we can also add additional fields to the table. So in my example, we have the odometer reading and then the service due. So we can add a calculation to this table that could tell us how many kilometers there are until the next service is due. So what that calculation would be doing is taking the service due amount and deducting the odometer reading, giving us the final kilometers that is between the two amounts and showing us, based on the odometer reading, how many kilometers are left till the next service. To set this up in the form, what we need to do is go to the toolbox category where we want to grab the field that we're adding to the asset table. So in this case, it's a calculation that I want to use to interact with that asset information. So we can drag and drop that into our table, just like we would working with any other table as part of the form builder. Selecting the calculation here, I can change the question to show the kilometers until the next service. And just like any calculation, we need to add the object names of the fields that we want to include. So here I'm going to grab our service due object name, going to copy that information and paste it into our calculation field. Now for calculations, they do work just like any equation would, where you can plus, minus, multiply, divide different fields to interact with each other. So in this case, I'm going to deduct the odometer reading from the service due. So to set that up in my calculation field, I'm going to add the object names in square brackets. So the first one that I'm adding here is the service due, and I'm making sure to include a square bracket at the start and end of that object name. And then just like any equation, I'm going to include the subtract symbol. And then I'm going to grab my odometer reading object name and copy that one back into our calculation and add this object name between the square brackets. Square brackets are really important to make sure that your calculation does work. So just double checking that you're including that there. For your calculations as well, you can include pre-text or post-text. So what this does is when it displays the amount in the field for the calculation field, it can either add a dollar sign to the start of the text if you're calculating a dollar amount, for example, or after the text you can include hours, or in this case kilometers. Just explain what that value represents a bit further for the user. So once you've updated the calculation field and added in the information there, that would be ready to go to use as part of the form. So at this stage, if this was all of the changes that I wanted to make to this particular asset table, I could deploy my changes, and then that would set that information live to then be used by the users. So the asset details would populate into these fields here, and then based on the values that are inputted into the odometer reading and the service due, this calculation would automatically update with the value for the kilometers until the next service. Now, other modifications that you can make to your asset details include changing the type of fields that are used within the form builder. So what I mean here is we can take a look at the fire extinguisher example again, and we can add in another asset table. So you can have more than one asset type within a form. So if, for example, that client and location does hold more than one asset type or more than one type of equipment at that location, you can have the different asset type tables to then populate all of those different assets within your form. So here it's the same process of adding in that asset table. We can update that object name again, just to make it nice and easy to understand which table relates to which asset type. So this is my fire extinguisher asset. I'm going to update this to fire extinguisher. In the same step again, where we want to select the relevant asset type. And then here, that's automatically populating all of those different asset fields for me. Now you can see for the inspection result down here, this is currently set as a drop-down field. And so what that will mean for the drop-down field is the first time that the drop-down field is populated and the user changes the answer. So if they change the answer to pass, and that's updated in the asset register to show that that asset has passed its inspection, the next service that is for that asset will then display the pass result as part of this field when it's updating the asset table with that fire extinguisher information. So to stop that happening, to stop it from automatically defaulting to the previous answer from the previous inspection, and while still giving the user the option to select those answers, we can change the type of field. So this works when we're looking at this drop-down field as a multiple choice field. So within your multiple choice, you have a couple of different types of multiple choice fields that you can use. And one common switch that you can make is changing this inspection result drop-down field to an inspection result button. So this won't default the answer to the last result that was given as part of the update that was made to the asset register. And it will also pull in some colors that will make it nice and easy to understand, and also a bit more appealing to the client who is receiving that final report and looking for those green or red answers, depending on what needs a further follow-up. So here, to change this inspection result field to a button, what I'm going to do is replicate the information from this field exactly in the button field. So I'm changing the question to the same question here. And then within the multiple choice answers, I want to make sure that it has the same options of pass and fail. We don't need to worry about the dash that's included here. We can just focus on the answers that will be given by the user. So to update these yes, no options that we have here, we can double click the item and then it will bring up a text field for us to enter in the answer. And we can do the same thing for the other option here. I can remove the NA because that's not required for this question. And now I have that inspection result showing in a nice, easy to use button field. So at this stage, I can delete the previous field. So this is the default field that's added by the asset information. And I can save that change just so that we see the new button field that we have added to this form. Now going back up into the asset table settings. So when we're looking at the settings, we're looking at these property options here. And as mentioned, this list is the list of asset fields, and these drop-down options are the actual text field or field within the form builder that that asset field is linked to. So because we've removed the original inspection result field, you can see that this is now showing as select, and it's not actually linking to any of the fields within the form. What we want to do is update this so that it does link to the new button field that we have added to the form. So to do that, we just select the drop-down field, find the form button that we've added with the inspection result header, and now that's linking to this form field for us. And so from here, I can deploy the change, and then that will be available to the users so that when they select the inspection result as pass or fail, it will still update that asset register to show what they have given as part of that report. In the example, if you do update your asset type, so I have deployed my changes, I'm happy with the tables that I've included as part of this report. And then my users have started using this report, but they're finding that there's some information missing, and you update your asset type with additional fields to capture as part of that. So the form template itself won't automatically update with any additional fields that you add to your asset type. So what we need to do once we have added those fields to our asset type, we need to come into the form builder here and reselect the asset type for that table. So selecting none and then reselecting the asset type that we want to display in that table, we then reset the fields that are pulled in, and it will add any of those new fields that you have updated the asset type with. Again, if you are making that change, you just need to make sure that you're deploying the form once the modifications have been made and you're happy with the content that's included there. The last step when you are integrating your assets with a form template is to go into your form actions and to make sure that you include an action to update the asset register. So this is really important to make sure that anytime a user is completing a report and they're changing any of that asset information, that it's then flowing through into your asset register to show that update in detail. So to add this action, we want to go into the Actions tab and select the New Actions option. And then within the action type drop-down field, we have the option here to update assets. So you can scroll down the list to locate this option, or you can start typing asset and filter the list through that action type. Once you select that action type, you can give the action a name based on the asset table that you've added to that particular action. So you do need to add an individual action per table. So you can see here that this has automatically selected my fire extinguisher asset table. That's the first table in the form. So I can label this as fire extinguisher. I want to save my action. And then it will add the update asset to the list of actions that are relating to this particular form template. Going into the Update Asset tab, Sorry, it's still looking at my, here we go. We can see the fire extinguisher assets name. So that's the name of the action that we've added, and that's all linked to the first asset table. So this name here is the object name that I've given that table in the report. So now we just need to add a action for the other table that we have also set up in this report. So in the asset element, you can select the other asset table that you've added, and you can also give that a name so that you can easily identify the actions, and then you can save that option. So just making sure that you're going through that step to ensure that that form is linking correctly to your asset register. So now once you've gone through those steps and you've added in your asset tables or your single asset to the form template, and you've included the option to update assets in the form actions, your form template is ready to go, and your users can start using that one and pulling in and managing that asset information. Fantastic. So I think I've covered off everything there for now. Thank you so much for joining us today. As I have mentioned, assets is one of our add-on features. So for this feature, we do have a standard pricing per month, which is $19.99 to have this feature added to your account. And there is an activation fee for the feature. If you're one of our enterprise customers, please don't hesitate to get in touch with us and we can discuss your pricing with you. But if you're new to Formatize, you can use the QR code on screen to book a demo with our welcome team, and we can go through this module as well as many of the other great features that we have. Otherwise, if you're already with us and you think that assets would be something that you'd like to take advantage of, you can use the QR code in the middle to activate this feature in your account. As always, if you do have any questions or if you'd like any further support, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Otherwise, we do have an extensive user guide that can also help answer any of your questions. Thank you so much again for joining us. So we will send out a link for this recording following the webinar. Everyone who's registered will receive that one, and the video will also be available on our YouTube page.